The transport vessel galley run drifted through the black emptiness of space like a lost coin in an ocean. Something had gone wrong with the navigation systems 3 hours ago, and nobody could figure out what. The ship carried supplies between colony worlds, mostly food and basic materials that people needed to survive on distant planets. David Hayes sat in the cargo bay, running his hands through his gray hair. He had spent 20 years working on shipping vessels back on Earth, moving containers across frozen Arctic waters where one mistake could sink an entire crew. Space was different, but the principle remained the same. Stay calm, think clearly, and never panic when things went sideways. The ship's crew consisted of 7 beings from 4 different species. Captain Wren was Italian, a species known for careful planning and strict adherence to safety protocols. His blue-tinted skin had turned almost purple with stress over the past few hours. The rest of the crew shuffled nervously through their stations, checking systems that had already been checked a dozen times. David walked to the cargo bay window and stared out at the reddish clouds of the Crimson Nebula. Most ships avoided this region because sensors didn't work properly here. The electromagnetic interference played havoc with guidance systems and communication arrays. The galley run had been trying to take a shortcut, a decision that now seemed incredibly foolish. A deep vibration ran through the hull, not the kind that came from engines or life support systems. This felt different, like when David used to feel whale songs through the hull of his Arctic transport ships back home. He pressed his hand against the cold metal wall and felt it again. Something massive was moving out there. The ship's alarm began to wail. David ran to the bridge where Captain Wren stood frozen, staring at the sensor display. A shape appeared on the screen, so large it barely fit within the scanner's range. The readings made no sense. The object measured several kilometers long and appeared to be alive. "All crew to escape pods immediately," Captain Wren ordered, his voice shaking. "We're abandoning ship." "Wait," David said, moving closer to the viewport. Through the red mist of the nebula, something emerged. It looked like pictures David had seen of ancient Earth whales mixed with images of deep-sea creatures that lived in trenches so deep no light ever reached them. The being's body glowed with faint bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in slow, deliberate rhythms. "That's a space Leviathan," whispered Toril, the ship's engineer. "I thought they were myths, stories to scare young pilots." The creature moved alongside the ship with surprising grace for something so enormous. Its body stretched back into the nebula clouds, impossible to see where it ended. Dozens of appendages drifted around it like the tentacles of a jellyfish, each one thick enough to crush the transport vessel with ease. Most of the crew rushed toward the escape pods, but David remained at the viewport. He had encountered large creatures before. Great white sharks in Earth's oceans, polar bears on ice sheets, even a pod of orcas that had followed his ship for 3 days straight. Size alone didn't make something dangerous. Behavior did. The Leviathan didn't attack. It circled the ship slowly, and those glowing patterns along its body pulsed faster. David realized it was trying to communicate. The patterns weren't random. They followed a sequence, repeated over and over. "Captain, I don't think it wants to hurt us," David called out. Captain Wren grabbed David's arm. "We're leaving. Now, that's an order." David pulled free gently but firmly. "I'm staying. That thing is curious, not aggressive. I've seen this behavior before." "In space," Captain Wren's eyes widened. "In Earth's oceans. Same principle. If it wanted us dead, we'd already be dead." The captain hesitated, then nodded sharply. "Your funeral, everyone else to the pods." He paused at the doorway. "If you survive, there's a case of Taloran wine in my quarters. It's yours." David found himself alone on the bridge as the escape pods launched one by one, their small engines flaring as they fled into the nebula. The Leviathan watched them go but made no move to follow. Instead, it returned its attention to the galley run, moving even closer. The ship shuddered as something brushed against the hull. David grabbed a support rail to steady himself. Through the viewport, he could see one of the creature's appendages, covered in what looked like overlapping plates of dark shell or bone. Embedded in those plates were clusters of organs that glowed different colors. The being was examining the ship the way David might examine an interesting rock found on a beach. A sound filled the bridge, so low and deep that David felt it in his chest more than heard it with his ears. The Leviathan was making noise, trying different frequencies and patterns. Some made the walls vibrate. Others created harmonics that rang through the metal like a bell. David sat down at the communication console and began working the controls. If the creature was attempting contact, maybe he could respond. He activated the external speakers and played back some of the sounds the Leviathan had made, modified through the ship's systems. The vibration stopped. The Leviathan went completely still. David held his breath, wondering if he had just made a terrible mistake. Then the creature's bioluminescent patterns exploded into a dazzling display of light and color that swept across its entire visible body. The patterns moved and shifted, creating images that David almost understood. Ancient stars, worlds forming and dying, civilizations rising and falling like waves. The Leviathan was old, older than human space exploration, older than most of the species in the galaxy, and it was lonely. David understood loneliness. He had spent months alone on Arctic shipping routes where the only company came from radio chatter and the occasional seal on an ice floe. This being had spent centuries, maybe millennia, drifting through the void with nothing but memories and silence. "Hello," David said quietly, knowing the creature couldn't understand English but hoping it might understand intent. "My name is David. I think maybe you could use a friend." David sat cross-legged on the bridge floor, watching the Leviathan through the viewport. The creature had settled into a slow orbit around the galley run, its massive body moving with the patience of something that had all the time in the universe. Every few minutes, it would pulse those bioluminescent patterns across its skin, and David tried to memorize the sequences. His stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten in hours. David made his way to the small galley kitchen attached to the bridge and rummaged through the storage compartments. A memory surfaced from his childhood, growing up in a fishing village on Earth's northern coast. His grandmother used to tell stories about sailors who would pour offerings into the sea for safe passage, wine for the ocean spirits, bread for the creatures below. The thought seemed ridiculous at first. This was space, not some superstitious ocean voyage. But then again, David was sitting on a ship talking to a creature that shouldn't exist, in a region of space that science said was impossible to navigate. Maybe old wisdom still had value. He remembered the cargo manifest. The galley run carried food supplies, medical equipment, and several crates marked for the colony breweries on Outpost Vega. David hurried down to the cargo bay and found the crates stacked against the far wall. Inside were barrels of fermented grain beverage, a beer recipe that Earth colonists had adapted for alien tastes. David selected one barrel and checked the airlock controls. This was either brilliant or the stupidest thing he had ever done. He loaded the barrel onto the airlock platform and began the venting sequence. The outer door opened, and mechanical arms pushed the barrel out into space. The barrel tumbled slowly through the void, spinning as it drifted toward the Leviathan. David held his breath. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then one of the creature's appendages uncoiled and reached out with surprising delicacy. The tip of the appendage split open, revealing what looked like sensory organs that glowed with soft purple light. The Leviathan touched the barrel, and the metal container crumpled like paper. Golden liquid burst out in a sphere that hung in the zero gravity, thousands of tiny droplets catching the light from distant stars. The appendage moved through the liquid cloud, and those sensory organs seemed to taste and analyze the floating beer. The bioluminescent patterns on the creature's body changed completely. Colors that David hadn't seen before rippled across its skin in waves. The patterns moved faster, almost excited. The Leviathan curled its appendage back, drawing some of the liquid into its body through channels David could see glowing beneath its translucent outer layers. David laughed despite himself. The ancient space creature liked beer. The ship's communication console began beeping frantically. David ran back to the bridge and stared at the screen. The Leviathan was sending signals directly to the ship's computer, bypassing normal channels. Images appeared on the display, crude at first but growing clearer as the creature learned how the technology worked. Pictures formed showing vast nebula clouds from angles no ship could reach. Star systems that didn't appear on any charts David knew. The Leviathan was sharing what it had seen, places it had been. Thousands of years of wandering through space, watching and remembering. David pulled up a chair and began responding. He uploaded images from Earth, oceans and mountains, cities and forests, pictures of whales in deep water because something told him the Leviathan would understand. The creature responded with images of other beings like itself, massive forms that drifted through the cosmic void. But those images were old, faded, like memories from a distant past. "You're alone," David said softly. "The others are gone, aren't they?" More images appeared, the other Leviathans scattering across the galaxy, each choosing their own path. Some went to the galactic core where stars burned bright and hot. Others headed to the dark spaces between galaxies where nothing existed but cold emptiness. This one, the being outside David's window, had chosen the nebulas and dust clouds, places where new stars were born and old ones died. David uploaded more images of human culture, art and music, the concept of friendship and gathering together, pictures of people sharing meals, raising glasses in celebration, telling stories around fires. The Leviathan watched, and its patterns shifted to something that felt like sadness mixed with curiosity. "We're social creatures," David explained, knowing the words didn't matter but the intent might. "Humans need other humans. We go crazy when we're alone too long. Even the most independent person needs someone to talk to eventually." The Leviathan sent back images of itself younger, smaller, surrounded by others of its kind. They had been a community once, sharing the vast emptiness together. But they had grown apart as they grew older, each seeking their own understanding of the universe. The being had thought solitude would bring wisdom. Instead, it brought only silence. David felt a deep ache in his chest. He understood that feeling. After his wife died 5 years ago, he had taken the job on the galley run specifically because it meant long periods of isolation. He thought being alone would be easier than being around people who reminded him of what he had lost. But isolation just made the emptiness bigger. "I know what you mean," David said. He sent images of his own, his wife's face, the empty house, the decision to leave Earth. Being alone doesn't heal anything. It just gives you more time to think about what you're missing. The Leviathan moved closer to the ship, pressing one of its appendages gently against the viewport. David put his hand on the glass from his side. The creature's bioluminescent patterns settled into a steady, calm rhythm. Not the excited bursts from before, but something that felt like contentment, like sitting in comfortable silence with an old friend. David checked the cargo manifest again. The galley run carried 11 more barrels of that beer. He smiled and headed back to the cargo bay. If sharing drinks was how humans made friends, maybe it worked the same way with ancient space creatures. The universe was big and cold and empty, but it didn't have to be lonely. Not when someone was willing to reach out with a simple gift and the hope of connection. 3 days passed in the strangest companionship David had ever experienced. The Leviathan, which David had started thinking of as Gormath after the creature sent him images that seemed like a name written in starlight, stayed close to the galley run. They developed a routine of sorts. David would send out another barrel of beer each morning, and Gormath would respond by sharing memories. These weren't just pictures anymore. Gormath had learned to interface directly with the ship's systems in ways that the original designers never intended. When David plugged himself into the ship's neural link headset, he could experience what the Leviathan wanted to show him. The first time nearly overwhelmed him. David found himself seeing through Gormath's senses, experiencing a star going supernova from close enough to feel the radiation as warmth. The scale was incomprehensible. He watched a planet form from cosmic dust over millions of years compressed into minutes. He witnessed the rise of a civilization, beings made of crystalline structures that sang to each other across their world, only to see them fall when their sun expanded and swallowed their home. David pulled off the headset, gasping. His hands shook as he tried to process what he had seen. Gormath had been there for all of it, watching, remembering, bearing witness to the universe's endless cycle of creation and destruction. "How old are you?" David asked the empty bridge. The answer came through the headset when he put it back on. Numbers that stretched back before humans had even evolved on Earth, before Earth had cooled enough for oceans to form. Gormath had been drifting through space when dinosaurs walked David's homeworld. But with that age came something David hadn't expected: knowledge. Practical, useful knowledge that species much younger than Gormath desperately needed. The Leviathan knew safe routes through regions of space that were supposed to be impossible to navigate. It remembered where ancient civilizations had left technology before they vanished. It understood cosmic phenomena that current science could barely explain. David spent hours learning, asking questions through images and feeling, since they still couldn't speak each other's languages in any traditional sense. Gormath seemed to enjoy teaching. The creature's bioluminescent patterns took on warm colors when David grasped a new concept, and cooler shades when he struggled to understand something. One session left David staring at a star chart he had created based on Gormath's memories. The routes shown would cut travel time between major colonies by weeks, maybe months. Ships could reach distant outposts that currently took years to supply. The economic and social impact would be enormous. "Why don't you share this with everyone?" David asked. "You could help so many people." Gormath's response was complex. Images of the Leviathan approaching ships in the past, only to be met with weapons fire. Memories of being hunted by species that wanted to capture and study it. Flashes of other Leviathans being killed by civilizations that feared what they didn't understand. Gormath had learned that most younger species reacted to the unknown with violence first and questions later. David felt a flash of shame. Humans had done the same thing countless times in their history, meeting something new and immediately trying to control it or destroy it. He thought of the whales on Earth, hunted nearly to extinction before people finally understood what they were losing. "Not everyone is like that," David said. "Some of us want to learn. Some of us know that the universe is better when we work together instead of against each other." The Leviathan sent images of David venting that first barrel of beer, a simple gesture of offering rather than taking, respect rather than dominance. Gormath had observed thousands of species over countless millennia. Very few had approached with kindness as their first impulse. David made a decision. He activated the emergency beacon, sending out a signal that would guide Captain Wren and the other crew members back to the galley run. It took 6 hours for the escape pods to navigate through the nebula and dock with the ship. The crew came aboard cautiously, weapons drawn, expecting to find the ship damaged or David dead. Instead, they found him sitting in the observation lounge, sharing a drink poured from one of the beer barrels, while Gormath floated peacefully outside the window. Captain Wren's blue skin turned almost white with shock. "You're drinking with it." "His name is Gormath," David corrected gently. "And yes, we've been getting to know each other. He has information that could change everything we know about navigating deep space." The crew gathered slowly, staring at the massive creature outside. Toril, the engineer, was the first to step forward. She was a Vin, a species known for their scientific curiosity. Her 4 eyes blinked in sequence as she studied Gormeth's bioluminescent patterns. "Those lights," she said slowly. "They're not random, that's communication, complex communication." David nodded. "He's been teaching me about star roots, cosmic phenomena, places in the galaxy we haven't even discovered yet. But he needs something in return." "What does a creature that old and powerful need from us?" Captain Wren asked suspiciously. David gestured to the window where Gormath's massive form glowed against the darkness. "The same thing any intelligent being needs: acknowledgement, respect, company. He's been alone for longer than our entire species has existed. All he wants is someone to share the universe with, someone who sees him as more than a monster or a resource to be exploited." Toril moved to the window and placed her hand against the glass. Gormeth's nearest appendage drifted closer, matching the gesture from outside. The engineer's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "We could learn so much," she whispered. "We could," David agreed, "but only if we approach this the right way, as equals, as friends, not as subjects to study or tools to use." Captain Wren was quiet for a long moment, his tactical mind clearly working through the implications. Finally, he sighed and moved to stand beside David. "Do you have any more of that beer?" David grinned and handed him a cup. "Plenty. Gormath likes it, and apparently it makes a good foundation for interspecies diplomacy." Outside the window, the ancient Leviathan pulsed with colors that might have been amusement, and the lonely void felt a little less empty. The galley run's communication array crackled to life with a distress signal. David was in the middle of showing Gormeth images of Earth's oceans when the alarm pulled him back to the bridge. Captain Wren was already there, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "Civilian transport, 15,000 kilometers from our position," the captain said without looking up. "They're under attack." David pulled up the tactical display. 3 ships surrounded a small passenger vessel, their weapons firing in controlled bursts. Pirates. The Crimson Nebula was notorious for attracting raiders who used the electromagnetic interference to ambush ships that strayed off main routes. "We need to help them," Toril said from the engineering station. Captain Wren's expression darkened. "The Galley Run is a cargo ship. We have minimal weapons and shields designed to protect against micrometeoroids, not military-grade plasma cannons. We'd be destroyed in minutes." David watched the display as the civilian ship's shields flickered and failed. The pirates weren't trying to destroy the vessel. They wanted the cargo and passengers intact. That meant people would be taken, sold, or held for ransom. He had heard stories about what happened to those captured by the raider fleets that operated in lawless space. "What about Gormeth?" David asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Captain Wren shook his head. "We can't ask that creature to fight our battles." "I'm not asking him to fight," David said. "I'm asking if he would be willing to help save lives. There's a difference." David went to the observation window where Gormeth floated in the red mist. He put on the neural link headset and reached out to the ancient being. The connection formed instantly now, much faster than it had in the beginning. Gormeth had learned to anticipate when David wanted to communicate. David sent images of the attack, the civilian ship filled with families and workers trying to reach colony worlds, the pirates who would take them, hurt them, use them. He didn't try to hide his emotions: fear for the innocent people, anger at those who preyed on the helpless, hope that someone with the power to make a difference would choose to act. Gormath's response was measured. The Leviathan sent back memories of its own, civilizations that had destroyed themselves through endless conflict, species that had asked Gormeth to take sides in wars, to use its size and power as a weapon. The being had chosen neutrality long ago, observing without interfering. "This isn't war," David sent back, forming the thoughts carefully. "This is protection. You told me you remember things, that you bear witness to what happens in the universe. What good is witnessing if you only watch and never act? Those people will become memories too. Bad ones. Memories of suffering you could have prevented. The Leviathan went still. David could feel something shifting in that ancient consciousness. Gormeth sent images of other Leviathans, the ones who had scattered across the galaxy. Some had chosen to interact with younger species. Others had removed themselves completely from galactic affairs. Gormeth had walked a middle path, present but uninvolved. David pressed harder. You said you were lonely. You said you missed having purpose beyond just drifting and remembering. Here's purpose. Here's a chance to be part of something instead of just watching it happen. You don't have to hurt anyone, just help us save them. A pulse of light ran through Gormeth's entire body, starting from the center and radiating outward. The Leviathan began to move, its massive form accelerating toward the battle site with surprising speed. He's going, David said, pulling off the headset. Get us there too, we need to coordinate. The galley run's engines fired, pushing the cargo ship toward the conflict. On the display, David could see the civilian vessel's hull beginning to breach. Atmosphere vented into space in glittering streams. The pirates had latched onto the ship with boarding tubes. Then Gormeth emerged from the nebula clouds. The pirates' sensors must have detected the massive biosignature, because their ships immediately broke off the attack. Weapons swiveled toward the Leviathan, and plasma bolts streaked through space. The shots hit Gormeth's hide and dissipated harmlessly, absorbed by layers of shell and tissue that had evolved over millions of years to withstand cosmic radiation and micrometeoroid impacts. Gormeth didn't attack. Instead, the Leviathan simply moved between the civilian ship and the pirates, using its body as a living shield. Its appendages spread out, creating a barrier thousands of meters wide. One of the pirate ships tried to go around, and Gormeth shifted position with fluid grace. The pirate captain must have realized they were dealing with something beyond their understanding, because the ship's engines flared, and it began to retreat. The other two pirates followed, their crews apparently deciding that whatever cargo they might have stolen wasn't worth facing a creature from ancient legends. David coordinated with the civilian ship's captain through the communication array. The passenger vessel was badly damaged but intact. Life support was failing in 2 compartments, but the crew was evacuating those sections. No fatalities. Everyone would survive. Tell them to stay close to us, Captain Wren ordered. We'll guide them out of the nebula. David relayed the message, then reached out to Gormeth again through the neural link. The Leviathan's patterns showed something that felt like satisfaction mixed with surprise. Gormeth had acted, had made a choice to protect instead of just observe, and it felt different than the endless solitude. Thank you, David sent simply. Gormeth responded with images of the rescued ship, the families inside who would reach their destinations safely because an ancient being had decided their lives mattered. The Leviathan had spent eons watching civilizations rise and fall, but this was different. This was immediate, personal, real. The galley run and the civilian vessel began the slow journey out of the Crimson Nebula, with Gormeth gliding alongside them like an escort. David watched through the viewport, thinking about how one simple gesture of offering beer to a lonely creature had led to this moment. How connection and respect had turned observation into action. Sometimes the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of kindness. And sometimes the oldest beings in the universe just needed someone to remind them why life was worth protecting in the first place. News traveled faster than light thanks to quantum communication relays scattered across known space. Within a week, half the galaxy had heard about the human who befriended a space Leviathan and convinced it to rescue a civilian ship from pirates. The story grew with each retelling, becoming more dramatic and less accurate as it spread. David found himself dealing with an unexpected problem: fame. The communication console hadn't stopped beeping for 3 days straight. Research institutions wanted to send science teams to study Gormath. Military organizations offered David contracts to act as a liaison, clearly hoping to turn the Leviathan into some kind of weapon. Corporations sent messages about exclusive rights to any discoveries or technology Gormath might share. Religious groups wanted to know if the ancient being had insights into the nature of existence and consciousness. "Make it stop," David groaned, rubbing his temples. Captain Wren looked exhausted too. The galley run had become the most famous cargo ship in the sector, and every organization with funding seemed to want a piece of what they had discovered. "We could disable the communication array. Then we'd miss legitimate distress calls," Toro pointed out. The engineer had appointed herself as unofficial filter for incoming messages, but even she was overwhelmed by the volume. David went to the observation lounge, where he could see Gormath floating in the nearby space. The Leviathan seemed unbothered by all the attention. Beings that lived for millions of years probably didn't worry much about temporary inconveniences. He put on the neural link and reached out. Gormath responded immediately, sending a wave of calm amusement. The ancient being found the whole situation entertaining. It had seen species rise to prominence and fall to obscurity countless times. A few weeks of communication chatter meant nothing on cosmic scales. "They want to study you," David sent. "Use you. Some probably want to hunt you again." Gormath sent back images of the past. Scientists who had approached with respect, asking questions and sharing knowledge in return. Warriors who had tried to capture Leviathans for military purposes, always failing because you couldn't cage something that had evolved in infinite space. Philosophers who had spent decades in meditation near Leviathans, seeking wisdom from beings older than their civilizations. The pattern was clear. Gormath had encountered it all before. The being knew how to handle unwanted attention. Simply leave. Drift to another part of the galaxy where nobody would find it for another 1,000 years. But something was different this time. Gormath sent images of David sharing that first barrel of beer. The conversation that had followed. The crew of the galley run learning to communicate with respect rather than fear. The rescue of the civilian ship. These weren't interactions the Leviathan wanted to abandon. "You want to stay," David said, surprised. Gormath's response was complex. Yes and no. The being wanted connection but not exploitation, companionship but not control. The Leviathan had spent eons alone because the alternative was being treated as a tool or a threat. What David offered was different: partnership, mutual benefit without ownership. An idea formed in David's mind. He pulled off the headset and called Captain Wren and Toril to the observation lounge. "What if we created a protocol?" David said. "Rules for how to interact with Gormath. Not laws that restrict him, but guidelines for anyone who wants to approach, like diplomatic protocols for meeting foreign dignitaries." Toril's 4 eyes blinked thoughtfully. "A formal structure. It could work. We'd need to make it clear that Gormath is autonomous, not property or a resource to be claimed. The Galactic Council has frameworks for dealing with protected species and sentient non-humanoid beings," Captain Wren added slowly. "We could adapt something similar. Establish the Crimson Nebula as a neutral zone where Gormath can choose who to interact with." David nodded eagerly. "And we offer something in return for the knowledge Gormath shares. Cultural exchanges, art, music, stories from different species. Things that have value beyond just data and resources. The Leviathan told me it likes learning about how younger species see the universe. We give that freely." They spent hours drafting the proposal. David insisted on running each section past Gormath, making sure the ancient being approved of what they were creating. The Leviathan offered suggestions through images and feelings that David translated into words. By the end, they had something unprecedented in galactic history. The Crimson Nebula Accords, as they named the document, established several key principles. First, Gormath was recognized as a sovereign being with full autonomy. Second, any ship wishing to enter the nebula and seek the Leviathan's guidance had to bring something of cultural value as an offering. Not payment, but a gift that showed respect and interest in genuine exchange. Third, violence or attempts to capture, study without consent, or exploit Gormath would result in permanent ban from the nebula and potential sanctions from participating governments. Captain Wren transmitted the proposal to the Galactic Council with a full report of everything they had experienced. To David's surprise, the response came within days. The Council not only approved the accords, but added their own commitment to protect the nebula region and any other Leviathans that might choose to interact with younger species. The real surprise came a week later. Gormath's bioluminescent patterns began pulsing in rhythms David had never seen before. Through the neural link, he felt the ancient being's excitement. Other signatures appeared on the ship's long-range sensors, massive biosignatures approaching from different directions. "Are those what I think they are?" Toril whispered, staring at her displays. David could barely speak. "Other Leviathans, they're coming." 4 more of the ancient beings emerged from the depths of space over the next several hours. They were similar to Gormath, but unique in their own ways. One had crystalline growths along its body that refracted starlight into rainbows. Another seemed to phase partially out of normal space, its form flickering between solid and translucent. They circled each other in what might have been a greeting dance, patterns of light and energy flowing between them. Gormath sent David a feeling of pure joy. The other Leviathans had heard about what happened here, about the human who offered beer and friendship instead of fear and weapons, about the partnership that had formed, about the accords that protected rather than restricted. They were curious. They wanted to see if this new approach might be worth trying for themselves. David watched the ancient beings move through space together, and he understood what he had really done. He hadn't just made a friend. He had shown these lonely, ancient creatures that connection was still possible, that the younger species of the galaxy were finally learning respect. The void was becoming a little less lonely, one barrel of beer at a time. 6 months after David Hayes vented that first barrel of beer into space, the Crimson Nebula had transformed from a navigation hazard into the galaxy's most unusual diplomatic zone. Ships arrived daily, carrying offerings and hopping for guidance from the Leviathans who now made the nebula their gathering place. David stood in the observation lounge of a new station that floated at the nebula's edge. The Galactic Council had built it as a neutral meeting point, a place where visitors could prepare their offerings and learn proper protocols before approaching the ancient beings. David had been appointed as the station's first director, a title that still felt strange to someone who had spent most of his life hauling cargo across frozen seas. Today's arrivals included an Italian merchant vessel carrying traditional music recordings, a Vin science ship with mathematical proofs they claimed were particularly elegant, and a human colonial transport with 5 barrels of a new beer recipe they hoped Gormath would enjoy. "The humans again," Toril said with amusement. She had taken a position as the station's chief engineer, designing systems that could safely facilitate communication between the Leviathans and visitors. "That's the 3rd Earth ship this month." David grinned. "We like to share drinks. It's cultural. Besides, Gormath really does prefer the beer over most other offerings." Through the viewport, he could see all 5 Leviathans moving through the nebula. They had established a routine of sorts, taking turns interacting with visitors while the others explored or rested in the deeper clouds. The crystalline one, which had accepted the name Shellora from a poet who visited last month, seemed to enjoy artistic offerings most. The phasing Leviathan, called nullvoid by the science community, preferred mathematical concepts and physical theories. A young Vin researcher approached David nervously. She was part of a team that had been granted permission to study the Leviathan's communication methods, provided they shared all findings freely and never attempted invasive procedures. "Director Hayes, we've made a discovery," she said, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly with excitement. "The Leviathans don't just remember things they've witnessed. They can share those memories with each other. They're creating a collective archive of galactic history that spans millions of years." David had suspected something like that, had mentioned sharing experiences with the other Leviathans, but the implications were staggering. They're living libraries. "More than that," the researcher continued, "they're choosing what to preserve and what to let fade, curating history based on what they believe is important, and they're starting to ask us what we think matters, what moments from our cultures should be remembered." That evening, David took one of the station's small shuttles out to where floated near a particularly dense section of nebula. The ancient being recognized the shuttle immediately, patterns of light pulsing and greeting. David activated the neural link, slipping into the now familiar connection. "I heard about the archive. You're preserving our stories." Sent waves of confirmation. The Leviathans had always remembered, but now they had purpose beyond simple observation. They were becoming bridges between past and future, keeping the wisdom of fallen civilizations alive for species that hadn't even evolved yet. And they were learning from the younger species too, gaining new perspectives on events they had witnessed but perhaps not fully understood. The researcher wanted to know what happens to the memories when a Leviathan dies, David sent carefully. It was a sensitive topic, but one that needed addressing. Response was peaceful rather than sad. When a Leviathan's time came, they would share everything with the others in a final communion. Nothing would be truly lost. Death was just another transformation in an endless cycle. The being sent images of stars dying and their matter forming new stars. Everything returned and renewed. "How much longer do you have?" David asked quietly. The answer was measured in geological time. Millions of years, maybe tens of millions. Was old but nowhere near the end. There was still so much to see, to learn, to share. Especially now, with the younger species finally learning to approach with respect instead of fear. A priority signal came through the shuttle's communication system. David apologized to and checked the message. It was from the station's traffic control. A ship had just arrived at the nebula's edge, broadcasting distress. "Engine failure, life support failing, 36 passengers including children." David was about to return to the station when moved first. The Leviathan accelerated toward the distressed ship with purpose. Through the neural link, David felt the ancient being's determination. This wasn't just about preserving memories anymore. It was about making sure there would be more memories to preserve. By the time David's shuttle caught up, had already positioned itself near the failing ship. One of the Leviathan's appendages extended carefully, creating a makeshift shield against solar radiation while the ship's failing systems were repaired. The other Leviathans arrived, forming a protective sphere around the vessel. Crystalline growths refracted and focused distant starlight, providing warmth. Phased partially into normal space, its unique properties somehow stabilizing the ship's power core. Station repair teams arrived and worked quickly, coordinated by Toral's efficient systems. Within hours, the ship was functional again, its passengers safe and deeply grateful. They had come seeking the legendary Leviathans and found something more valuable than guidance. They found active protection and care. Later, back on the station, David stood at the viewport with a cup of Earth coffee. Captain joined him, the old captain having taken early retirement to serve as the station's diplomatic coordinator. "It's spreading," said, gesturing to the traffic display. 3 more nebula regions are reporting Leviathan activity. They're establishing safe zones across the galaxy, places where ships in trouble can find help. David nodded slowly. "Told me their kind used to do this millions of years ago, before younger species started hunting them. They're returning to an old purpose." "Because you offered one of them beer and treated it like a person." "Like a friend," David corrected. "That's all anyone really wants, to be seen, to be valued, to matter to someone else." He raised his coffee cup toward the window where distant form glowed against the nebula clouds. "Turns out that's true whether you're human or millions of years old and bigger than a spaceship." The ancient Leviathan pulsed with light, a gesture David had come to recognize as contentment. Out in the vast darkness, other lights appeared as more Leviathans gathered. The void was becoming crowded with ancient beings who had chosen connection over solitude. And it had all started with one simple, very human gesture: offering a drink to a stranger and hopping for friendship in return.